one of our other committee members, Matt, who had prepared the introduction, actually can't be here tonight. So Evan and I are going to wing it, and I think we're going to do a good job with it. So thank you.
Let's sing Jillian happy birthday today.
Yay! Thank you. I've been actually singing all day.
Yes.
Been singing all day. I've been annoying, and I'll tell anyone that I can. So whether it's like an Uber driver or like the shoppers person that's serving me, like I have to let them know it's my birthday. So it's been fun to get like random happy birthdays from strangers. Enjoy it. So thanks everyone for coming to the event tonight. We'll just do a couple quick announcements and then we're going to jump right in because it's clearly going to be an awesome conversation tonight with some different perspectives. So it's going to be a really good conversation. Before we get started, just a couple announcements about the Ottawa industry. So for those who don't know, OJAM, Ottawa's official game jam, is coming up. So OJAM, it's actually our second event this end of June, and it's a game jam that's the last weekend before Canada Day every year. So this year we're having sponsors like Unity, Microsoft, Ubisoft, as well as some local studios like Carmen Interactive, who've all pitched in to sponsor to make it an awesome event. It's going to be held at the Microsoft venue downtown. There's going to be free food, free coffee, free snacks, and something really cool is that we really wanted to make sure that people that were doing the jam were sort of learning, growing, and taking a lot in during the 48-hour game jam. So we've actually brought on a new committee member who's a senior developer UX guy from Ubisoft. His name is David Lightbound. He's come on board to not only mentor, but also be the mentor director. So he's pulling in mentors from top studios in the industry to be there on hand to help you develop your games. So it's actually going to be a really cool event. We've only got 20 spots left. So you've got about a month, right? It starts in a month, so there's 20 spots left. So sign up on the OJAM. You can check on OJAM on the Facebook site and sign up that way. But it's going to be a really cool event. And also one thing we wanted to do was to sort of give back to the community as well. So we've partnered up with Extra Life, which is a 24-hour gaming for sick kids, for CHIO, charity. And they're actually creating a special promotion for OJAM, so we're going to be supporting the community as well. So it's going to be an amazing event and free shit, so that's fantastic. Alongside of that, this weekend actually is kind of a different kind of game jam. It's actually called Glam Jam. And it's a game jam for women only. So women are going to be the only developers of the games this weekend. It's going to be held at Carleton, which will be really fun. And the purpose of the game jam is to develop games to teach girls in grades 6, 7, and 8 math, right? Because we really want to focus on making sure that women and girls are getting into the math and sciences, which is super important. So any girls, women interested, you can check out the Glam Jam site or talk to me after. We're also still looking for a couple mentors to help the girls develop and volunteers during the event, which can be anyone can volunteer. So if you want more information on that, you can check with me. And very quickly, MIGS is coming up in Montreal. MIGS is every fall in Montreal. If anyone wants to submit a speaker talk, you've got 5 days left to do that. You can check it out on the MIGS site. And also, do not buy your ticket or register yet. So I'm going to work on an initiative to bring Ottawa to MIGS. So last year I got about a 50% off discount for people from Ottawa going, as well as free transportation. I'm working on that same deal, which I should have finalized in about a week. So if you're thinking about going to MIGS, do not buy your ticket yet. So I'll be announcing this stuff on the IGDA Ottawa Facebook and social media sites. So make sure you follow and like us and keep up to date on information.
I think you got everything. Except there's going to be one extra announcement at the end of the whole
Ooh, a surprise announcement? That's right. To keep everyone here. Also, it's my birthday.
And that's not the surprise announcement.
Okay, well,
is it free cake?
I'm sure there might be surprise cake. I think that might be the announcement.
Well, you'll just have to wait.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
All right, guys. Let me get my questions out here. The infamous list. So we have way more questions that we can cover here. It's a good thing. But we're going to try to prioritize things. And we kind of have two almost kind of like big general topics we're going to cover. Some of them are with like just kind of general game development and how to select game engines and various things that are kind of useful for discussing. And then we're actually going to talk about education as well, and like learning, education and learning as well, because that's kind of an interesting topic to a lot of us here. So kind of, I want to start off by kind of just like having everybody kind of introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of talk about our experience and all that kind of stuff. So maybe I'll go in order.
Sure. Hi everybody, thank you for coming here and listening to our talks. My name is Arya. I'm an instructor, a faculty member at Carleton University School of Information Technology. Some of you know me because you've been in my school. Some of you know me because you came to Global Game Jam, which is the event that we have in January. I teach computer programming, and I used to teach game design. I no longer teach it. But my main interest, as was mentioned, is mostly looking at game engines and game development tools and technologies from an educational point of view. But I also do a little bit of on the side game development of my own and with a couple of my students. So we'll get to that. I'm mostly targeting game for children, but if we get a chance, I'll talk about that experience and the tools that we use and things like that, and also the things that we use from an educational point of view.
Tony. I am, I guess, an indie developer. I was a teacher at Algonquin, and I'm the lead developer on Cuphead.
That's it? That's all you got, really?
That's all I got.
I'm Mike Desjardins. I am the same, an independent game developer. I taught myself everything I know using Unity, and I now do contract work for Carmen Interactive. I have two of my own studios, the Meatly Games as well as Hidden Lanterns. I have a released game with the Meatly Games called Meatly Makes, and I also have 8 assets in the Unity Asset Store, and that's basically everything I do.
My name is Jared. I'm a senior engineer at Snowden Studios, another indie studio here in the city, a small company here. And prior to that, I've worked at Ubisoft Montreal, as well as Magmic, and I've got a background in a couple different engines. My bread and butter, I'd say, is probably C++. That's what I really love and enjoy. But like some of the other folks on the panel here, Unity as well is a large part of my independent practice.
Cool. And yeah, I'm Evan. I'm one of the co-founders of Snowden Studios, and also a professor at Algonquin. I've used a lot of engines over the years. Unity and Unreal are the two ones that I know like right now, but I've also kind of used a bunch of kind of older ones like Virtuals and Torque and Gamebryo as well. But I don't actually remember anything about those engines really. I'm also
a nightmare.
Torque was a nightmare.
Yeah. I hope I never remember.
And then I've also kind of touched, I've been involved in developed a few in-house engines and also kind of touched on a few kind of proprietary like AAA in-house engines as well. So I've kind of been all over the place as far as engines go. So we kind of already covered, I think, basically our experience with engines and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, to start off here, I kind of want to ask, are engines actually even necessary to make games? Is it possible to make a game without either creating your own engine or using somebody else's engine?
Sure.
I think like the whole point of an engine is to make the entire process a lot easier. It's not necessary in any way. Like you can essentially, if you're making a game from scratch, you're creating an engine yourself. But I don't think it's necessary. It's just it makes it a lot easier. And that's kind of.
You know what, so for me, I kind of see engine as taking a role in content authoring. So like let's say content authoring is your Photoshop or your 3ds Max or whatever that is. You're creating the content that's going to go into your game. And then the game engine is going to take some level of that responsibility and some level of putting that into your actual game, and how you're going to define things like metadata and information about your assets, right? So for me, there's I guess a bit of a question on, well, what is the game engine actually doing for you? And is it necessary? Well, sure as hell no. You can hard code a bitmap or a few vertices, right? But depending on what you're making, I think you should really evaluate what your needs are on the whole content authoring into the actual game. That's where I think it's probably the most, kind of the meat of that question.
What is a game?
No. I think the most important part about a game engine is the accessibility. Because if you're kind of like, I remember when I was trying to like get into game development way long ago, like maybe 10, 15 years ago or something, and 15 years, yeah, about 15 years ago, and I was looking around trying to find like a good way to get into it, but back then there weren't any like easily accessible, like really low skill ceiling, or barrier of entry engines to actually use, right? Actually, one of the first ones, and I was talking to some people about this outside, was RPG Maker. Like that was one of the first ones I used because it was technically it's still an engine. You're still authoring a game with it, but it's very easy to get into, and the rules are kind of really set. You can't really change anything. But I think that's the most important part with engines now is that like students can get into it really easily, or if you're trying to do it as a hobby, you can get into it like much easier than if you were to have to create your own framework and engine by yourself, right?
Yeah, I kind of want to follow up from there because that's, I think, the student and hobby that you just mentioned is kind of a very important thing. In answer to that question, I guess one of the important things is to think about what is it that you want to do before you think about should I use this or that. And before I mention what exactly I mean by that, I have to repeat something that I was telling one of the guys before we start, that my wife always says that I tend to disagree with things. And I like disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing. And I have to admit that when Jillian told me about this, I said, oh, this is a good opportunity to go and disagree with things. So what I kind of think about this is that, do we think game engines are necessary? Maybe we should disagree with that question, because you have to think about what is it that you want to do, and then based on what you want to do, think about what tool is appropriate for it. There are so many different tools available for doing different things, for example, making games or anything related to that. And it's the purpose that is important. So let's say, for example, your purpose is to learn about games, how games work, what is deep down inside the game, how the games actually operate, and how you can become a professional game developer. In that sense, maybe the answer is not to start with a game engine. Maybe I should go back to what Jared said, that I believe in C++ as the language of God or something. So I say, you know what? Forget about these things. Go back to basics. Remember Unix and console applications and things like that. Learn hardcore programming first, because that's how, at the end of the day, each game is. It's a program. On the other hand, you may say, okay, you know what? I'm a game designer. I don't want to be a developer. I want to make a prototype, and I want to show my idea, and I want to show my design. In that sense, maybe you don't want to go back and learn C++ because it doesn't do you anything. In that sense, maybe an engine that brings together a whole bunch of things, like a nice editor and a nice environment, that would be the best solution for you. So in a sense, it all goes back to what is it that you want to do. If your hobbies, as was mentioned before, and you just want to impress your spouse or your parents, maybe the easiest game engine, the RPG Maker or Game Maker are your solution. So it kind of goes back to what exactly it is that you want to do.
So, on that, I'm glad how you read between the lines there that I meant to say that C++ is the language of gods. But yeah, for who you are, what you're doing, what your skill sets are, that's all going to inform your decision. And what you want to become, I think, is perhaps one that's a little bit overlooked. A lot of people say, you know, I'm scared of making games. It's hard. It sounds like a lot of work. There's so many choices out there. And they say, okay, well, based on what I know now, what can I approach? And a lot of people, they'll get into more approachable engines like Game Maker and RPG Maker based on that fact, rather than thinking, well, what I really want is I want to be making cool indie games, or I want to be doing AAA games, or I want to be doing that. And I think not a lot of people are seeing the sort of the decision-making process from a building up yourself kind of perspective. And yeah, I think I'd like to kind of make that point.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, in my opinion, like I don't even think that I don't think a game engine I think the game engine and the tools, the content authoring tools, are totally separate things. Like, for example, as soon as you ship your game to your players and your audience, like, typically those tools, like the Unity editor doesn't get sent with the thing. So like the Unity editor isn't actually the game engine, but like all modern game engines have all these tools. So it's one of the biggest like deciding factors on selecting a game engine. So like it, and like from like a development standpoint, like if you were making it from scratch, like technically even if you're just making a game engine just for one game, I think there's still value in kind of approaching it as making an engine, because the complexity of making a game and making all that stuff is so hard to manage that having that kind of separation between engine and your game, I think, will help you through the process.
I think it's also an important thing that you just mentioned, that maybe we should get the terminology right, that an engine is not necessarily the editor. There are different tools. Not necessarily every engine comes with an editor, although these days, as you mentioned, most engines come with a development kit that includes all of these fancy tools that make things easier for us. But if you go back to some years before when the engines started, game engine, they didn't have necessarily a development. Basically, there was a whole bunch of software code and API to how to use them, and that was pretty much it.
All right. So, okay, let's say we won't consider the educational or learning aspect, but if you just want to make a game, so you're in a company and you need to make a game, what's the value of using an external game engine, say, versus making your own?
I think it definitely, based on your experiences and the things that you already know, it can simplify the process a lot. So imagine that you want to make a game that uses some effects that already exist on Unity Asset Store, and you're not a particularly great effect programmer or anything like that. Starting from scratch and building these things for yourself may not make much sense, but using Unity that has those things and is a fairly friendly thing to learn as opposed to some other one may have a lot of advantages for you. But on the other hand, if you're planning to make a whole lot of other things, then the initial investment of learning something or building something could actually be worth it. So it kind of depends how you see you're going and where you see you're going. So if you know that you're going to build a lot of custom things, you will need a lot of custom things, maybe it's a better idea to start creating your own stuff or maybe creating your own assets. But on the other hand, if you don't see that happening or if you're not sure about it, using the engine can get you started a lot faster.
So on that, I agree totally with what you're saying. When it comes to asset stores and making your own content and making custom content, this is sort of a trap a lot of people fall into, especially when they're building like some of their early games when they're just starting to learn. I don't want to devalue that. That is a valid way to learn and a valid way to produce a product. But if, going back to the question, we're talking, let's say, we're our studio here, our, 40-person strange theater studio here. We have to make the decision, what technology are we going to use going forward? I think going with something that is going to give you a lot of asset store type opportunities to say, we'll just plug this in, we'll just plug this in, we'll just plug this in. Our code doesn't matter what you need. It's sort of a risky decision to take because nobody is an expert in pre-built content, right? It doesn't matter whether it's art assets and saying that, this person made their skeletons this way, this person made their skeletons this way, they're going to be referenced differently, they did it in a different content authoring pipeline. Building it yourself has a lot of advantages, if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, I'm not sure there's another option, right?
So when you say building yourself, you mean building, so there's a difference between building your own, like using Unity and building your own stuff in Unity, or building an entirely new
Building Unity. Yeah, totally. What I mean is how much of your content that's going to be in your game is going to be pre-built by somebody else, right? What you're shipping, right? So let's say you're making a Unity game with Unity 4.x, right? Before they got pretty, let's say. Part of what it came with was an aesthetic, right? The primitives you put in your game, they're going to look a certain way. The skyboxes are going to look a certain way. It's got that, in the city, Jonah actually did a bit of a micro talk on it before about having that sort of Unity smell to it. What your game's going to look and feel like. that's part of the pre-authored content, and that's valid to think about. Same with how Unreal Engine 4, when you're making a game with that, it's got a lot of the interesting sort of lighting and sky techniques that are going to come out of that. That's part of the pre-authored content, but the asset store, I would be very careful about just saying, this engine, I'm going to use it because it's got a great asset base. I'm just going to plop in my RPG toolbar. That's going to give me all the spells I cast. I'm going to plop in. Let me know if I'm saying something you're selling. Sorry.
It doesn't bother me if people buy it.
So I'd be a little bit wary about that if you can afford to be wary about it.
I think it's, sorry, go ahead.
On that topic, I think a big thing from a business standpoint, as a studio looking at engines, would be time. Honestly, how much time are you going to have to put in to learn an engine and actually produce something usable with it, as opposed to creating your own engine? Based on that time, things are going to cost you a lot more money as a studio. So really, a lot of time, I guess think of it business-like, which not a term I like to use often, but I mean.
Why else would Blizzard make Hearthstone in Unity?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. They wanted to get something up really, really fast.
Yeah.
And clearly, their engines that they built in-house did not support that sort of thing, right? So I think, honestly, a really big aspect of that is time, and how much time you're willing to put in as a studio.
I think there's definitely all of these things. I mean, it saves time. You have somebody whose job is to develop this engine, as opposed to you have a big company developing the engine and providing it. So there's a lot of advantages. But I was telling my students this last term, when they were asking me, okay, why are we using this tool as opposed to some other tool that's a lot easier to use? We could do this in one line. Now we're doing 100 lines of code to do the same thing. And one thing that I'm kind of always telling my students is that with anything that is done easy, you're sacrificing something. So now you have to make the choice wisely. It doesn't mean that don't make that sacrifice. Yeah, it might be all worth it, but you give away something when you get that ease. With that ease, you may give away your control over how your program is optimized, or with that, you may give away your control on what direction you want to go in future, or the general look and feel of your game. You can go back and look at the student projects that are done these days with Unity. You can see, okay, this is a Unity game, you know what? You can see that. And I usually don't tell my student that, hey, I can look at your project, it looks like 10 other Unity games that I've seen.
I did tell my students that.
Yeah, maybe I should too. But that's the reality. So it's a valid decision that I want to go with this engine or that engine, but it's a decision that has to be made wisely, knowing what is it that you're giving away and what is it that you're gaining for it. And based on all of these things that you said, hopefully you can have an understanding of what is it that you're giving away to get that convenience, basically.
Can you talk about some of those compromises? Like let's say a student is choosing, they're kind of narrow it down a little bit. They're a developer with C# experience. Why would you not take Unity, right? That's a pretty easy to defend point.
That's a very good thing, actually. For example, you mentioned C#. I don't know how many of you have been around enough to remember 4 years ago when XNA was the other Unity. You would go to every school and everybody was using XNA. You would go to every game jam, everybody was using XNA. Probably one of the few good things that came out of Microsoft, and they didn't manage to keep it around. But the thing is that XNA was also C# based. Unity does JavaScript too, but most people use C#. So,
You can use Boo with XNA. That is a true fact.
So if you're a C# programmer, let's say you want to compare these two things together. C# and many other graphics library, technically you may say that XNA is not necessarily a game engine. You may say it is. It's somewhere in between a graphics library and actual engine. But the thing about it, if you're writing XNA game, you would get the chance to see how your game actually works. You build your game, you show how you're adding your, for example, effects and things like that. So you have a better understanding of what your program is actually doing. As opposed to in Unity, you may be like Mike and learn every single detail about game development through Unity. It doesn't mean say that because you're a Unity developer, you don't get to see behind the scene. But there are a lot of things that don't easily show up. So for example, the effects, how you do shading, how you do this. There are a lot of things you go to the inspector, change some properties, and somehow magically your program renders differently. You don't exactly know how it happened. And if someday you decide that you want to do things a little differently, suddenly you're in a mess that you don't know how to do it. As opposed to the same C# programmer that we're doing in XNA, you would probably sit down and create your shader language yourself, and you add your shader language and those things. You get an understanding of how these things work. The same thing about, for example, Unreal. I haven't done Unreal for development much, but I just recently started because I'm thinking about how to switch to that in my game. And I had a simple thing about how, I don't know how many of you used Unreal, have used the tone mappers. So there's this tone mapping thing, and I went and searched it, and it's a big fiasco about it. Because Unreal has a default tone mapping, you render your game, and suddenly the colors are not the colors that you want. And you go and hit yourself in the head trying to realize, okay, why is it that my colors are not the colors that I want to be? I have a white background and it shows up gray. And you have to go through a whole bunch of different things to realize why is it that the Unreal is doing this tone mapping and how you can change it. And once you get to those little tricks, you see that it takes you forever to figure out how Unreal is doing it and how you can change it. As opposed to when you were writing your own code, yeah, you had a difficult time of setting up things yourself, but you know exactly how things are happening and why things are happening. So I think kind of details like that, or optimization. What is it that you want to render? What is it that you don't want to render? How you want to do render this and that? How your gravity works. I don't know if in Unity you have tried to do the mouse click things. Mouse click in Unity depends on where your camera is, what's the depth of your object, and all sorts of things that you may not know. I mean, say, okay, I'm clicking on this damn object, nothing happens. My mouse click event never triggers. I don't know why. Well, because you're using a camera that has a particular property. What the hell has camera property have to do with mouse click? It does. Or depth of the object, or something like that. So when you get to things like that, if you are writing your own code, things make a lot more sense because you know how they're happening. I don't know if you kind of explain that.
I hear you saying. I'm just playing devil's advocate though. Like, I mean, if you are doing something from scratch, you have to fix a lot of problems you won't necessarily consider. You have to fix all the bugs, go through all of the QA that they've already gone through. If you're bringing new people on, you have to train them how to use that. Whereas if you were to bring, people might already know how to use Unity or Unreal and stuff like that. So you could potentially be able to bring people on and get them up to speed quicker because they might already know how to do things.
Definitely.
I think to play devil's advocate to that is
Double.
God's advocate? I don't know. Would be like when you have a problem in something like Unity, you're waiting on Unity themselves to fix it. And sometimes it can take forever, and sometimes they'll fix it in one and it will be broken again in another version, where as if you have your own engine, you can fix it right away and you can make sure that it's fixed. And always, so there is kind of, there's still always trade-offs like that.
Yeah, but Unity has a huge community that someone's going to
That's
find
true.
some workaround for it, right?
Yeah.
To play devil's
Triple
advocate.
devil advocate.
So I recently worked on the title with Unity on PlayStation 4, and the community there happens to not be so big.
Yeah.
And the developers doing it tend to be doing wildly different things, and to rely on a main Unity sort of development team developing features, trying to hopefully listen to like the 1 to a dozen, give or take, developers on the PlayStation team at Unity who are saying, hey, don't break this stuff. These guys are going literally insane. It can be really frustrating. So if you see a tool that says, hey, we support, A through Z, that doesn't mean it's all equal support by any stretch of the imagination. So when you've got something saying, it's gone through all this QA, all of this other stuff, it could actually be dramatically more difficult than fixing something yourself in some situations where you've got an issue, you know what the problem is, you tell someone and they're like, yeah, they're busy crunching on Unity 7. Some problems get to be unfixable.
But that's a Unity problem. Like people on Unreal, like we have this experience, we have people fixing Unreal Engine right now for the PS4.
So
Unreal
I would,
open source.
Yes, exactly.
yeah. So I would say this is more of an open source problem than a Unity problem.
Yeah.
But like,
Unity's a big community that's like open source 0.25.
I mean, once you're talking about multi-platform stuff, if you were to do your own thing, you have to code all that. You have to do all that platform stuff yourself.
Yes.
which is a huge deal. Like people hire large teams to do that stuff.
Yeah.
Like if you're a small team together, like that's a lot of work that you don't necessarily want to do yourself.
Well, you see, the reality is that in these days, software development, be it for games or anything else, the idea of doing everything from scratch technically doesn't exist. Because no matter what you do, at some point in time, you are using some API, some library, some things. You cannot avoid using Direct3D and OpenGL if you're doing game development. I mean, yeah, maybe you want to go and replace Direct3D and OpenGL with something else, but I highly doubt anybody in this room is planning to do something like that. So at some point in time, you're stuck with some things that somebody else has developed. But the point is, as we said, is the trade-off. So where is it that you think is the right point for you to depend on somebody else? Because, and it's not always just fixing something. Sometimes even everything is completely fixed and you know exactly how Unity or Unreal or anything works. They may not be optimized for the way that you want to do things. I had an instructor back when I was in university, and we were talking about reusable code. It was a software engineering course, had nothing to do with games. So the idea of reusable code is that you create components that other people can use. But the point is that once you start having this notion of create a reusable code, then that reusable code is not optimized for a certain way of doing things. It tries to be as general so different people can use it in different ways. It's a good thing because now it's not custom. It's basically general purpose and can be used with a lot of people. But on the other hand, it makes it not optimized because it tries to be as usable by as many people. So at some point in time, you realize, okay, if I had developed my own game engine, if I had developed this tool myself, maybe I know I'm never going to use this particular feature. By getting rid of that feature, I can optimize my code a lot better for my purpose. Of course, you may argue that, okay, maybe in future you would need that feature, but that's a decision that you will make. But the point is that a general purpose reusable engine is not optimized for specific uses that you may have. That's another thing to remember.
Yeah, so kind of touching on that, so I made a unit asset called Dialoger, and I released that a while ago. And that's actually the biggest thing I see is the fact that because it's such a general tool, it's meant for everyone to be able to incorporate it in their own projects and stuff. And you probably see this a lot too with your stuff, is that it does not support specific things that people want to do. And so really at that point, you're kind of, when you're getting like requests, like people are like, oh, can you do like add this to it? I'm thinking, okay, I can add that in a certain way that makes it usable for some people, but doesn't ruin it for other people. Yeah. And it kind of makes a general tool even more bloated and more like unoptimized for a specific purpose.
Which can ruin that tool.
Which can
it can completely ruin the whole point of it. It's a dilemma that all people who try to make things that are reusable have. How much do I make it reusable and general as opposed to specialized for something and efficient for a particular type of task?
So I guess the takeaway might be do one thing really, really well unless people will pay you a lot more to not do one thing really, really well. It's
unless they're
totally
paying
up
specifically
to
for it to do one thing very, very well. And that, I mean,
it's totally up to the expectation.
Things are always going to be a judgment call. And I kind of, like, when it comes to efficiency and optimal, like, making things optimal, like, almost all the time you don't need the most optimal code. You need something that works, you need to get it working well, you need to be bug-free, and then, like, if certain things are slow, you can make those faster, or you can customize certain things. I mean, just because, like, most game engines you have, like mainstream game engines you have right now, like, are a package. You don't just, like, pick and choose. Otherwise, you're just using middleware, and it's not trivial to just take middleware and plug them together. So, like, in a lot of cases, I think it makes a lot of sense just to take an engine and then customize different things. In Unity, you can change aspects of the lighting model. You can change a lot of things to make it look completely different. You can plug in C++ DLLs if you need fast things. With Unreal, you have the whole source code. You can change whatever you want, hypothetically. I know, like, there's some trade-offs there when it comes to, like, changing Unreal because they're always updating it. Every month they put out a new version, and the more you change, the harder it is to upgrade the version. But I feel like, for a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense to make your own engine.
nowadays at least, yeah. Like there's so many other good like solutions.
I'd say your use case would have to be pretty narrow, pretty scoped in to use even a low-level engine in general, no less writing your own. You know, I know a lot of people have been down that road. I've been down that road, and there are advantages sometimes, but also, especially when you start talking about going into multi-platforms and stuff like that, it's like, all right, you know, you did something well, it's working good, you're running OpenGL, and all of a sudden you want to make your game look and feel the same way on the Microsoft platform. You know, that's going to want to run DirectX. It's, you know, it's a hard pill to swallow, saying like, I did it all myself, it's working great, let's start moving it around, and I have to reinvent that wheel.
Being a teacher, if I may do a shortcut to the education part of this conversation, I think this is a valid point that most cases you will end up using one of these game engines because it just makes sense, because it does provide a lot of things, and the problems that it causes are not that important for your particular studio or particular project, so it makes sense. The first thing is that make sure that you're making that decision wisely, knowing what is it that you're using. But the other thing is that if this is an educational activity for you, so you're starting to learn things as opposed to, I'm working in this studio and want to release an app, because now things completely change. If you are here to work at an app that you want to submit somewhere and release it, you have a different set of criteria. If you're sitting in your home and you want to learn about game development, you have a different set of criteria. If it's the other one and you want to learn, I suggest, if you want to become a game developer, not necessarily a game designer or content developer or anything like that, if you want to become a game developer, start learning some basics. Even if you're not planning to become a C++ programmer, it makes sense and it pays if you go back and write an OpenGL program, or use, I don't know, another OpenGL abstraction on top of it. There are a whole bunch of them, or things like that. Or, I don't know, other graphics library. I use my students know Allegro, which is a wrapper around OpenGL. It's a fairly simple thing to do, and you can do coding with it. It pays if you start with that, at least for educational purposes, because it gives you a sense of...
on that one.
Sure.
It really depends on the person, like
yes,
big
of course.
time, because for me, I've been doing this for 2.5 years now, and when I first started, I knew nothing. I didn't know how to program. I had no idea what making a video game was even like. And I sent a message to Jason Nguyen's from Breakfall, and I was like, how do you make games? And he's like, oh, you could read this book, read that book. I'm like, no, I'm not interested. And he's like, you could try Unity. Okay, tried Unity, and then, you know, I just spent every single day learning, using their tutorials. Unity taught me everything. And then just Googling, going on YouTube. 6 months later, I had an asset. A year later, I'm doing contract work. Now I have 2 studios. So it kind of depends on the person, how you're willing to learn. If Unity disappeared, I wouldn't even know where to begin, but I'm going to have to figure it out.
It's actually a very good other point to touch on, is the fact that if no one knows what these engines will be like around and how long they'll be around for. So if they did disappear, like a lot of people would be at work because they don't know like a lot of other things, right?
But something else will come around, right? Like Unity
I assume like something
brought
will
me into
come
this
out.
industry.
Considering the
Something
big
else
base Unity user base that out there, somebody will find a solution for it.
Exactly, yeah.
So I agree with like that. There is no single solution. I mean, there is a single path for doing things. There are a billion people. There are probably a billion different ways to do things. It's maybe not a billion, but quite a few. So maybe that will work for some people. Maybe that work. But I personally feel that a safer way to become a game developer, or more maybe I shouldn't say safer, but a way to make sure that you are more flexible to do different things is to start with a foundation that allows you to connect to different things and is not limited. So Unity is a very special.
I wouldn't have a job if I didn't go with Unity.
Well, I got that.
Well, I wouldn't have a job in a year,
So
I guess.
Well, we cannot go back in time and do it. Maybe when I invent my time machine.
It
to
depends
go
who
and
you
try.
are, is my point. It really depends on how you learn. I
Yeah.
learned through reverse engineering, so I just kind of like see what somebody did. And at the time when I started learning, I didn't know anything about code. So I literally had to go through each line. So what does this do? What does that do? And that's how I learned. But if somebody was trying to teach me the fundamentals, knowing how I work, I wouldn't even, I'm not interested.
So I think
Maybe.
building up sort of from ground zero, you know, it's still very person to person, right?
Yeah.
You know, on what do you know, what are you good at, how are you as a student, you know, and how are you at teaching yourself things. You know, that all comes into play for learning your first engine. But I will say some of the probably all of the best engineers I know, they don't know one language, they don't know one tool, they don't know two, they don't know three, they know so many that it just is met with a shrug saying, I know code, I know game engines, you know, and that it's you just become so versed in different things, and to different degrees. You're not an expert in everything. You've got the tool you use every day, the tool you're best at. Just like I was saying earlier, you know, C++, that's my bread and butter, but geez, for a while now I've been doing C# and JavaScript. It's met with a shrug. It's I use what needs to be used to get the job done, and I think that's more for a longer term. How do you make yourself a better engineer? This doesn't have to do with everybody in every discipline, but in engineering, how do you become a better engineer? You expose yourself to different ideas and different ways of working.
Yeah, because the truth is, there is no either C programmer or C++ programmer or C# programmer. You are a programmer. That means you understand computer programming, understand the logic of how a computer program works. And maybe the idea of, okay, try these different things is to convince yourself that I'm not just a C# programmer or a Unity programmer. I have understood what the main idea is, and then I can adapt to different things. So if you want to start with Unity, you may want to start with Unity. You want to start with something else, you want to start with something else. But I recommend to all of you, including Mike here, that don't limit yourself to one of them. Even if you started Unity because that works better for you to quickly make something first and see how it is, I recommend go back and try a couple of other ones and make sure that you convince yourself that you are a versatile engineer, just like was said before.
I mean, like, it always comes down to kind of what you want to learn and where you want to take your career too. Like, if you do want to be a hardcore systems engine programmer, like, starting out with Unity might not be the way to go. Like, maybe you do want to start from scratch. If your goal is just to like learn how to make games or prototype or even become maybe just a game designer, maybe you don't even want to be a programmer at all. You just want to learn how games work. Then Unity might work out really great for you.
I think it's a good point, because being in game industry and doing game stuff doesn't necessarily mean being a game developer. A game programmer, maybe I shouldn't use the word developer. There are a lot of other people, majority of people in the game studio may not even be programmers. So for those of people who want to be designers or level designer or anything like that, it doesn't make sense to start with something like C++ programming. Or even if you don't want to be a hardcore programmer or anything like that.
But even the basics of Unity, if you're just jumping in and you're not a coder, like at the time when I started, I didn't know anything about programming. It helped me learn logic of programming.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So yeah, for anybody who doesn't want to be a programmer, you'll at least understand the basics to know the flow of coding, which is in every language. So.
All right, so kind of on this whole topic of learning and whatever, do you feel that certain engines make you more attractive to employers than others? Like if you had to just choose like one engine.
Unity.
I think you could do both, where it could make you attractive to employers and also unattractive to them, I guess. Like for example, like I mentioned RPG Maker a while ago. If I were to list that on a resume, that's like this guy's not serious about making games. This doesn't make any sense. But if you were to list like Unreal or Gamebryo or something, like something that's really regarded as like AAA standard, that would definitely make you attractive. And I think lately, especially Unity, because so many new game like opportunities have opened up revolving around Unity. Like a lot of the time, like you'll see a lot of things where they're specifically asking for, okay, where we need an Unreal developer or a Unity developer specifically instead of someone who just knows how to code, like, or a programmer. So I think, again, touching on the point, like, where knowing a little bit of everything at least, really, I think that would make you a lot more attractive.
It probably depends on the employer too. So maybe
Absolutely.
if you're planning to go and work for Ubisoft, maybe Unity is not a particularly important thing for them because they're using their own tool. But if you're working with a smaller studio that is content Unity based, then knowing Unity will be helpful. So it may depend on the employers too.
Could we have someone start counting the amount of times we say Unity? That'd be great.
So actually on that, having been a programmer at Ubisoft, one thing that I found really interesting is their programming test, which one of my colleagues was telling me about recently, and it's much the same as the one I took, where they'll test you on a series of different topics. They're not saying, oh, you want to be a gameplay person on the Watchdogs team? Ah, well, we'll see if you know this engine and this programming language. They're like, no, how's your assembly? Crap, like everyone else, all right. How's your C#? How's your sound? How's your animation programming? How's all of your different programming, which is the only test I took, that's all I can talk about. But they're testing you on a variety of different skills. So saying, being good at this engine will help you get this job. At Ubisoft, it didn't really work that way. So if, let's say, you saw an opening, gameplay programmer, that's my jam. I want to be a gameplay programmer. And you've been a Unity developer for ages, and you just aced their C# test, and the C++ one, you did good enough to get the job, but you aced the C# test. Ooh, that might show that that's not where your passion is, that's not where your experience and your bread and butter is, So I think, what game engine should you be learning in order to get a specific job? The one you want to get hired doing. I think it's pretty simple. Be diverse, have a lot of different skills. The same as doing any sort of job, you don't want to be a one-trick pony. You want to have if the company shifts strategies and they say, we're not using Flash for UI anymore, now we're using HTML or whatever UI becomes. Being a one-trick pony kind of sucks because it means they gotta fire and hire, and that's not good. Or they have to train you, which is, they'll do, but it's expensive, If you show you have a diverse skill set, I think that's obviously the most attractive.
I think the biggest thing, though, is that showing that you have a diverse skill set proves that you are willing to learn more and willing to grow as a developer. And I think that itself is more important than knowing any one specific thing. Yeah. Not even knowing the skills, but showing that you enjoy knowing more and more about it. It's hard to say.
This sounds a lot like sort of the thing that I had always heard in college, which is do side projects all the time, right?
I used to try to tell my students all the time, be working on games all the time, make things nonstop. Hopefully I got through to some of them, but honestly, I think that's.
Oh, no, anyways, you just you have to experience life outside of making games every once in a while.
True. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just gonna do the whole recycling game stuff into games and stuff like that. The whole kind of inbreeding of game development. Anyways, so I should probably give everybody an opportunity to ask questions. Is there any questions out in the audience? Yeah.
Could you talk about the benefits? Talk about game engines in relation to the scale of the studio. Like, for instance, if you have 300 employees, you might not be trying to save time on using Unity. Whereas with a smaller studio, you have to you have to get to the product a lot faster. But what are the pluses and minuses in the size of the studio?
I think that's interesting because a lot of the time, I think things like Unity, as opposed to things like Unreal, are Unity is I think it's probably meant for smaller teams. It doesn't scale well. We have a team of 3 to 4 people working on it, and it's still I guess maybe 6 now, and it is literally so hard to just integrate it with version control. Whereas something like Unreal is meant for a AAA sort of environment, right, where you have hundreds of people working on it. I forget what I was going to say there. I guess if you have the time to spend and the money to spend on making your own engine, and you think that that's the best way to go, I think it's absolutely the best way to go. You don't want to limit yourself, like Ali was saying, by using an engine that won't let you do specific things, just to sacrifice doing specific things just to make it faster for you. So it's a
I can
judgment.
imagine using Unity in a large team. One of the games that I'm working on with Carmen Interactive, there's 3 of us that use Unity. And yeah, with version control, even with just 3 of us, sometimes you update and everything's broken, and there's one simple thing that you need to change. And I couldn't imagine that with 30 people. That would be insane.
It makes me really interested to know how like Blizzard worked with Hearthstone.
Yeah.
And like I would love to see their process stuff behind that. So I can guarantee they probably didn't have a team of more than 10 people on it.
Yeah.
If they did, I'm glad to be wrong about it, but I would love to see how they did it.
Behavior was using Unity pretty seriously for a while, but I don't know how they approached it.
Yeah.
I just know that they were using behavior for a while, although they're not using it anymore.
Right.
So, because they get some limits with it.
So I've worked on some pretty massive teams. I still don't know a team bigger than Watch Dogs. I was not sure there's ever been one. I don't know. That was insane. That's the best word for that. But I think that when it comes to versioning, specifically to address that before the big studio thing, it always requires strong direction from the top, technical minds who understand what the problems are going to be ahead of time, and to understand, okay, this is how you're going to divide things, this is how you're going to branch things, this is how this team works. They work in a cell, this team works in a cell, this team works in a cell, and then you've got smart people that help stitch stuff together. And it requires discipline and practice and people with experience, and that's going to be true no matter how big your team gets, But as far as what team size constitutes a specific engine, there's sort of, let's say, medium and small companies. I'm speaking very matter of fact here. This is a lot of opinion. But I'd say for small and medium-sized companies, it comes down a lot to what's your team good at, and who do you have in your city, who can you recruit onto your team, and what are the high-level people at your studio experienced with, right? That's going to dictate a lot of what are your skill sets, what's your niche, what types of games are you making. But I think there is a threshold when you get big enough that developing your own technology is going to help you stay ahead of a curve that you could not possibly do with anybody else's technology. So if you're at Ubisoft, 5 years ago when everybody's talking about the new global illumination trend, that friggin', everybody knew it was possible since, decades ago, but it's like, hey, this is feasible, this is going to be the new trend, this is what games look like now. You can't wait for a Unity 5.x, you can't wait for Unreal 4.x. You have to be developing that the moment it becomes a buzz, and you're also part of working with the different universities and working with the other professionals in the industry to develop this new type of technology when it's new. You want to be part of that wave. So there is that sort of threshold when you don't really have a choice. You have to do the big studio thing. You have to make your own, or use your own, or buy someone else's with all the source code. You have to stay competitive if you're making that type of game.
Yep.
So if you would create a matrix for different engine assessment, what would be the dimensions? I'm wondering if there's something that you could use, such as deployability, assets, and sound support, and meshes. Is there anything that could be used, and can you compare all these engines and what other engines there will be out there that you could add in this comparison, I wonder? And the other thing is, can I ask another question? So, how about 3D browsers? Where do you put 3D browsers such as Genus VR? It's my interest is social VR, and I know that you can integrate in anything you create in Unity in Genus VR as a level, but it would be interesting to even go beyond about all these engines and work with a browser where you can integrate and go in between all these levels that are created with different engines. And I would like to see where you see 3D VRs on top of engines.
Well, for the first question, I think it is kind of difficult to make that matrix because there are probably too many dimensions that you can think about features that one engine has and the other one doesn't. There are some basic ones that everybody talks about. So for example, how user-friendly is the editor, or how easy it is to do the programming, or how much they support multiplayer, how many features they have. There are some things, the type of audio quality that they support 3D audio or not. There are some things that are features that everybody talks about, and maybe it is possible, and probably if you search online, there are some people who have some matrix like that comparing some basic features, but there are probably too many dimensions to fit into that matrix. So you may kind of, okay, by the way, do they do version control? Oh my God, I didn't think about version control when I was designing my matrix. So I don't think there is a matrix out there that has all of the possible features, but you can probably find some form of comparison between them.
You don't necessarily have to have, like, consider every single factor.
Categories would be
You could
nice.
potentially like have like big teams, small teams, whatever, this type of graphics, multiplayer, and so on. Or platforms too, because platforms are
Yeah.
definitely big. Like for example, if you're doing web,
Yeah.
you're going to be heavily restricted of what games engines you could choose.
So to start with, even if you go to Wikipedia, it has some comparison table of game engines for like the platforms and things like that. And I can probably, off the top of my head, I cannot say, but I know I've seen a couple of other comparison table of at that level. Okay, these are the basic features. But depending on what are the other features that you have, you may not easily find a matrix like that, because the problem is that even people may not agree on what is the thing that goes into that matrix. So for example, if one of them is ease of use, that I know you would be interested in, that ease of use may not be something that can be easily objectively put into that matrix, because some people may find it easy, some people may not. So because some specific features are very, very objective, it's okay, it supports this, it supports that. But some things start to become subjective, and then it's hard to put that matrix. For the second question, I think we had some volunteers who wanted to talk about web stuff, so maybe they can talk about that.
So I really like web games right now. It's my fad of the day. VR, I really can't speak much on that. For VR with web, I have no experience there. But gosh, I mean, as far as like, it might kind of come back to what I was talking about earlier between content authoring. You know, how are you going to build the parts of the game that make it a game, and how is that going to actually integrate into technology that the user is going to be able to integrate with and play? You know, like, is it going to support the right dev kits? Is it going to support the right browsers? Which is, I think, most people know is kind of a nightmare if you've ever made a website. You know, it's there are questions to ask yourself. I think the future is bright for web and for VR. They're both, I'd say, roughly at the same point by no right. Web should be much further.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they're both at the same point, from my perspective, as far as intriguing technologies that are, one's very accessible, one's not accessible, but they're both early sort of stage developments for what the future games are going to look like. And I think it's probably too early to say right now how those are going to impact each other, other than just play with the cool new stuff like a lot of folks have been doing already, you know, with other technologies as they become new.
You guys have used on the panel, used like some of the modern popular engines a lot. So I have, for example, I have a lot of specific frustrations with like Unity Terrain. If you're not that great at scripting, then it's more of a boondoggle than anything else. I think it's overall, like, most of it shouldn't be integrated in the engine. I'd like to know some of the panel's personal frustrations with specific aspects of the modern game engines, whether it be Unreal, Unity, or
None.
Unity Terrain.
Unity is
I wish
perfect.
debugging would work properly. That would be
Yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The Unity Terrain, like you said, shit, it is the worst. I think a lot of times, you see this in a lot of engines, input integration.
Yeah.
Tends to be really annoying in a lot of things. To the point where, you know, sometimes you want to write your own thing, which is fine, which is absolutely fine.
I think part of that might be the whole like generalization versus
Yeah.
specialization.
Exactly,
Like, because
yeah.
all these engines are made for like all the platforms,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
like that makes it a bit harder to make everybody happy.
Right. Before we
Oh, yeah,
continue or anything, is anybody going to boo me out of the room if I go use the washroom?
Yep, go for it.
We do it after you that.
After I leave, that's smart. That's smart.
I think you've got a 10-minute countdown.
10-minute countdown. Okay, I think there's one more question here.
Number one and number two. It's on the topic of engine frustrations, actually.
Yeah.
I'm found some limitations with collision detection. And I'm wondering if you guys can recommend specific resources to learn about that topic, because I haven't found any.
There's books. So I mean, I haven't touched like real low-level collision detection in a long time, because physics engines do it really awesome now. you can
So
actually...
that's why I said start with the C++ program and learn these things.
like when I was trying to learn games, like collision detection was the hardest thing. And you were like, how do I know if these two things are hitting each other? And then you're just like, figure out math for the rest of like your life. But now with like, there's actually really awesome physics engines and stuff like that do that work for you. There's still good books that will teach you that stuff, but you don't necessarily have to know it. I mean, I'm kind of like a little bit hesitant there because there have been occasions where it has been useful for me, but in general, I do find that the physics engines work really well. And most of them are free now, and some of them are open source, like Bullet, the Box2D are open source, and PhysX is free, but I don't think it's open source, at least last time I checked. But if you remind me later, I might be able to think of some books. It's just been a while.
Or
Yeah.
website, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know about books. I don't remember if they are covered in any particular books, or there are probably some tutorials. But what I suggest is probably what Mike would suggest to start with a simple example and put things together so you understand how things are working in the game engine that you're using. For example,
Just out of curiosity, is it the player controller in Unity that you're frustrated with?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes a
Don't
lot of
use
sense.
don't
Don't
use
do
it.
that.
It doesn't detect objects going into it. But I can talk to you some workarounds later if you want.
Are you going to be at Monkey Joe's?
Yeah, I'll be there.
I'll,
Yeah.
I'll find you, thank you.
I think there's a question over here.
Sorry,
Sorry.
question. He's looking for collision detection stuff. There's a really good book called Real-Time Collision Detection. It's a big orange book.
That's one of the books I was going to recommend.
Yeah, it's $60 on Amazon, but it covers like
I'll write it down.
everything. And he's got a really good blog too.
Yeah.
And really, when you get down to actual collision detection, it's not that hard at all. Once you like really get to the nitty-gritty, and he covers everything because it basically covers.
All right. I think I should. Sorry, Mike, cut you off. I think I should probably wrap it up soon. Is there any urgent questions that you want to cover before we stop?
urgent.
Because we will be at Monkey Joe's.
After we wrap up, everyone can go to Monkey Joe's right next door for networking and drinks and food.
Yeah, because we have one. We need. Yes, our special announcement. There's cake. Because it's Joey's birthday. And here it is, the cake.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Jillian. Happy birthday to you.
There's a couple of kids there with the plates and the forks, so help yourself.